This
Strategy
conference will now be recorded.
web session on digital revenue strategies. I'm Douglas Hegley. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and I'm co-chair of the Strategy SIG along with Trisha Robson, who's our sort of technical wizard right now, trying to help us run this busy and wonderful online meeting. As we get started, I just want to, of course, acknowledge that these are really strange times. These are stressful times. I'm sure all of you are dealing with any number of things in your lives, and I wish all of you health and safety, and the same to your loved ones. And MCN is a community, and I hope that if you feel like you need advice, comfort, someone to chat with, a happy hour, that you reach out to any of us at MCN, because we're all in this together, even though we're apart. So it's probably most of you know, I posted a topic on the MCN Strategy SIG Basecamp site a couple of weeks ago, April 14th, actually, maybe 3 weeks ago. It went something like this: we're all facing uphill climbs, and for many of us, we have this added stress of a sudden renewed focus on digital by our organizations, by our bosses, by our boards. And all jokes aside about, my boss just discovered me or just discovered digital, it does seem clear that we are going to continue to face this kind of 1-2 punch of increased scrutiny and rapidly rising expectations for sort of digital miracles. So the question I wanted to explore was, as we adjust to this new reality, what are some ways that we might produce revenue for our organizations? I mean, most of our efforts to date have been focused on making content, engaging audiences, all good things, but we left the money-making tasks to our colleagues in the development office or retail and food and bev or events and programs. It really didn't land generally on us to be responsible for making money. We may now be asked to find an effective way to bring in funds via digital interfaces. As many of you saw, this generated considerable engagement on Basecamp, and that prompted Trisha and I to really think about putting some sessions together to look at this. So we kick off with today's session, where we're going to frame the strategic approaches and big picture perspectives. I want to emphasize this is a dialogue, not a lecture. As we talk, we invite you to add thoughts or questions via the chat. We'll try to respond as we move along. We'll also reserve some dedicated time for Q&A later in the session. So let's meet my two partners in crime here with brief introductions. Brad, why don't you start?
Sure. I know a lot of people on this thread, but not everyone. So, my name is Brad Dunn. I'm the Web and Digital Engagement Director at the Field Museum in Chicago. So my team and I, we oversee social media and web and other digital engagement pieces. Sometimes those overlap with in-gallery experiences. But then we're sort of structured in an interesting way because the Collections database falls under IT. Just a friendly reminder too, if you are not muted, it'll help the chat. Looks like most everyone is, but you may want to just double check your settings real quick. So we don't oversee the collections database, but we collaborate with our colleagues in IT. We collaborate with our colleagues in exhibitions on there. And that's pretty much what I'm working on.
That's my dog.
I'll soft shoe for a little bit while Nik gets things ready with his what must be an adorable puppy.
She is an adorable puppy, and every now and again she just loses her mind for some reason, sees a rabbit outside.
There's a decent chance I'll be tackled by a 7-year-old or like side hugged by a 7-year-old during the call, so we all understand.
And that's actually the good thing about this. I don't know, it's great to see so many faces, and I echo what Douglas said about this is a weird time, but this is a community organization, and everything from professional help to personal and social help. I think you should take advantage of this, because you can in this community you can exclude a whole bunch of things to get to the real. You don't have to talk about the pressures that you're under. We're all sharing them, so you can get straight to the context of, I just need mental help getting through this, because it is really stressful. So my name is Nik Honeysett. I'm CEO of VPOC. We are a non-profit technology organization located in Balboa Park in San Diego. And I've been down. You can probably see the sun shining in. So I feel somewhat guilty for everybody who's maybe on the East Coast is expecting some bad weather. I'll send good weather to you.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks, Nik. I'm gonna start off here by reading a quote from our friend and colleague Seb Chan. Quote, "Those thinking that there's money in them digital hills are, for the most part, dreaming, both in the cultural sector and elsewhere. The economies of online have changed significantly over the past decades, yet it often feels like many people still consider it new." That came from his newsletter published in April. So Nik, I know you've been working on this topic for some time, and with some recent meetings and efforts during this global pandemic, can you please describe these recent sessions you've had with museum leaders and what the tone of those conversations has been?
So it's interesting you use Seb's quote, because it's kind of like everybody just woke up, or particularly leadership just woke up that, oh, there's this digital stuff going on, and all of a sudden it was, well, we should be making money from it. And there was no, I'm still having a hard time figuring out where did that come from, this notion that you could just start making money from it. So what is the precedent that they're looking at that says, oh yeah, just, turn on the cash faucet and money will start coming through? And so partly, I reckon there was a rush to put just any kind of content online, which, I raised as an issue and expressed caution to everybody of don't just flood, this is probably here for certainly the medium term. Be thoughtful about what you're doing. Don't just throw stuff out there and use up everything that you have, or just, turn off your audiences because you've just got this, 10 or 15-year-old video content that you suddenly came across, and so you posted it up. But I think so at that point, a number of executive directors. So in just as a little backstory, I work in Balboa Park. There's about 30 executive directors of various cultural institutions, 17 of those in museums, and then we have performing arts and orchestra and youth theatre and a whole bunch of things. And they're all asking the same thing, and then they're all going to their teams saying, you should be doing something about this. So I cautioned them about what they were doing. So then they kind of threw that back at me and said, well, you tell us what we should be doing. How do we generate revenue from digital? And then, a layer down, the CFOs and the COOs and then the digital folks are coming to me saying, don't tell them that we could create money from digital. Help us out here, Nik. Come on. So ostensibly, what I started kind of, I guess, couching them on is you can't just turn on a spigot of money from this. You've got to be really thoughtful about this. And if any of you are expecting your teams to suddenly turn some, a revenue stream on from the activities that they've been doing, it's just not going to happen. It's just, there's no paywall. You don't have the infrastructure to be able to support that.
A work call.
And
We recorded. Okay, are you done pooping? I'm on a work call.
Oh, okay. You're done pooping. So this is what I love about webinars out of people's homes. But this is a real problem, and they're really challenged with trying to figure out how to do this. And so my approach has been, you've got to be really thoughtful about this. There are things that you have to put in place. I mean, you can generate money from digital. You can generate some revenue from it, but most institutions are just not in a place to do it. Partly because you've got to have some really compelling content that people are gonna watch, and really it's a scale issue that is your challenge. I think Scott is talking next week or in the next couple of weeks about Corning. So they have a great example of turning on, monetization for their YouTube channel. But a lot of the conversations I've had with directors is, well, here's the consequence, and here's the compromise that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to get into, showing ads on your YouTube channel. You're going to have to figure out how to generate scale from with your audiences. And we had one great example actually happened in the middle of all this, on this whole concept of scale. And the Air and Space Museum in San Diego had an Apollo 13 event. And so they did a Facebook live stream. They had some great folks in there. They had Gene Kranz. I mean, they have access. They had Jim Lovell. They had access to some really good people. But because they hadn't done the work of building scale and really effective digital communications on that. They had, which wasn't too bad, they had about 12, 13,000 people watch that live event. And they made periodic asks for donation, and they generated around $4,000 from that. And so we had a debrief on that. And so there was a really healthy conversation around, okay, if we'd had 130,000 people that we had built over time, a following on our YouTube channel, and we'd made the same ask, statistically, we may have got $40,000 from it. So encouraging that there are there's no direct immediate revenue from this, but there are things that you can do and things you frankly should have been doing before that can build up your the scale and the views that you're in front of that can do that. And then the message I kind of lead them into those conversations, giving examples of people making money on Instagram and all these other platforms, TikTok, and what is available to do that. But really what I'm trying to convince them is to invest in more of a bottom line approach of revenue from digital or technology, and that's really invest in your infrastructure, invest in data analytics, invest in a more of a mobile first, maybe digital first program and infrastructure, because when we all come back, if you're not set up to be a lot more efficient, it's going to be a problem. So I'm trying to lead them in with telling them what I think they should, what they think they should, hear, which is, all the candy stuff. But I'm trying to feed them the broccoli and the kale in terms of, time to invest now and certainly not cut. That was a long-winded answer.
No, Nik, thank you. That's good. And I think, we're going to wrap around to some of these topics again at some point. You were referencing that there will be another session on this topic. It's next week. And we'll come back around to that near the end also. That session will be a little bit more focused on specific tactics and actual reports on things that museums have done and whether they've succeeded or failed. Today's session is really primarily around sort of framing the strategic approach and maybe the big picture thinking around all of this. So Brad, tell us a little bit about how this is being framed at the Field Museum.
Sure. So for context, I report up to the executive level, which I report directly to the chief marketing officer. And I'm actually very lucky because even though his background is not in digital and he leans on me and my team to provide perspective and strategy in that area, he has always understood the long game and very much believes in the long game. So I've actually never, over the years and now during the closure, ever gotten pressure from him I've gotten the question of how would we think about monetizing? How can we support the stores? But he's never believed that it's this thing you turn on. So I'm actually, compared to a lot of the stories I'm hearing, I actually think I'm in a pretty lucky place as far as that goes. I have actually always believed that we are sitting on a few opportunities that I think that Scott Sayer and his team that he'll talk about next week have already activated. We have actually over time talked about the opportunity that we actually have a few opportunities to monetize through YouTube, through our content stream there with the Brain Scoop. Not that we should necessarily turn on ads. I actually happen to believe more in a sponsorship-based approach there with that. But we haven't done that because there's been a variety of other factors internally. So now that we've moved into this period of time, though, that and other conversations and how we support membership and other things have actually kind of risen back to the top. But in a weird way, it's actually to do things that we have been talking about for a long time that we actually want to do. And so it's a little, again, I think it's a little backwards from what I'm hearing from a lot of my colleagues. My team actually, several people on our team and in marketing got together recently to basically go back to several other departments with sort of say like, several other departments are really executing hard with their constituencies, and we thought that there was an opportunity to talk more to like on behalf of membership, on behalf of fundraising, to talk to some of these audiences and some of our main channels. And so what our team did was they took it on themselves to start to outline some strategies, some goals, what we might measure as success. and go back to them with tactics that we want to do rather than waiting to hear from strategy for them. We're sort of taking the lead, not just on strategy in our channels, which we normally run, but rather also in how to support their areas of the business. And we're in the process of doing that right now. I'm pretty optimistic as to how that will go. But then the other thing that I've actually been talking to my boss and to others about is we've actually, because I was just saying this to Nik just before the call, we're busier than ever, but it's on a smaller amount of things, right? So we can't talk about exhibitions. We can't talk about encouraging people to visit the museum. So it's all been about this sort of field experience at home. It's been about pulling together. It's been about doing a bunch of things, honestly, that we would have been great to have done earlier, but we just did not have the bandwidth. And it's given my team time to really execute in a way that I think is smarter. But it hasn't really been around monetization, but it's actually freed us up to get a lot of analytics and reporting in place. So we've got a lot more transparency with the rest of the organization. It's been about reminding the rest of the museum that we are not an org chart, that in fact, when we serve audiences that are looking for learning material, that may not all come from the Learning Center. It might also come from our conservation group. It also includes the Brain Scoop. So we've been able to put a smarter content strategy around that work that we're doing. And it's now freeing, now that we got through that initial rush, as you were saying, Nik, get all the content online immediately seemed to be the thing at the beginning. And I think that we should have done that, but I also think the need for it was possibly overstated, or at least there was a panic about it that probably didn't need to be there, but we were all panicking together, so that's fine. But now the team is really thinking through what I'm talking to my boss a lot about is monetization means sometimes supporting monetized activities through better user experience. So I'm not interested in put this button here or put all these buttons on these pages, but rather think through what's the experience for people that will set them up, inspire them, remind them why they should support us, and also do it at the right moment within a user flow to capture them at the right moment to try to increase donations. What can we provide to members? And so I'm looking to my team a lot to help us think through user experience from a design standpoint and from that digital experience, but also reminding the whole organization to put users first. What we need now are donations, but they don't need to give us donations now. What can we do for them that will help facilitate that? So just having that conversation with my boss, and then he's really great, along with he and I and my other directors, we spend a lot of time reminding people that overseeing the brand of your organization is a long game, and we can't forget that in this moment. And so we are definitely doing some shorter term, quick tactical things to send the message that we're being team players and we're aware of the moment that we're in. But that we're also still asking people to remember there is a long game to be played. So there's the long game, there's supporting monetization through user experience, and then there's starting to activate some things we've been talking about forever. And I think that will still take a while, and it's certainly not going to be the thing that replaces completely missing revenue streams such as attendance or special events. So just setting those expectations.
I'm picking up on a couple of things you said, Brad. So the adoption curve is playing out across Balboa Park and all these institutions. So, there are some institutions who've kind of taken on board, what I've been saying, and partly my message is, is to generate a comprehensive digital strategy. But digital strategy is as much about being, nimble and innovative and entrepreneurial, but mostly it's about being relevant. And so this notion of relevancy is kind of starting to permeate through organizations. We're certainly encouraging them to have a broader interpretation than perhaps before on their mission and their audience as we pursue this kind of scale initiative. But I think one of the most kind of successful things that we're doing right now, and this speaks to what you were saying, Brad, is this kind of notion of total cost of a program. because if you start calculating, because mostly it's, you know, the program is, well, we've always done this and it's, you know, it's hugely successful, you know, according to the programmers. But if you talk to the CFO, it's like, no, you know, that thing loses money and we need to, you know, subsidize it from over here. So helping folks understand that every program that you do has some kind of total cost of ownership, of which there is a technology component, which might be, you know, the sign up or the you know, the management of it or the communication of it and all those kinds of things. If you can capture those things and then you know, help folks understand that this is a time of investment, and that investing in, you know, while the plane is on the ground, as it were, you know, investing in some technology infrastructure that is going to allow you to eliminate some of the extra effort, you know, and museums are not very good at calculating, you know, hidden costs like time spent on something. You know, it's like, this is your job, and if it takes you 2 days of the week, it takes you 2 days of the week, instead of saying that 2 days, you know, your work on this could be shrunk to 1 day a week, and that saves you, you know, however much money, you know, there's a monetary value to that. And so, you know, that all gets wrapped up in what you were saying as well, Brad, about, you know, metrics. You know, the way to scale up these things is definitely metrics, and helping, you know, the success we're happening is doing some analysis on programs and helping them understand, you know, actually giving them a way to eliminate some things. So if you know, go through the success we've had of these kind of workshops around, okay, these are all the things we do. Let's plot them on a matrix of, you know, financial sustainability against vision and impact, and just, you know, just 4 quadrants, typical consultant stuff. But, you know, when you do that, and it can be anything, it can be, you know, our website, or it could be that, you know, after school program, or it could be, you know, this other thing. And plot them, get the people who program them to plot them on that matrix, and then get the CFO to move the post-its around to see where they actually land. But then use that, you know, if you've got something that's in the lower left quadrant, which doesn't make money and it doesn't have a high, you know, vision or impact, you've either got to stop doing it, or you've got to figure out how to move it to the right, or move it up, or ideally move it up to that kind of high financial sustainability and high impact. But, you know, you do need to do things that may be, you know, high impact and low financial sustainability, but then you've got to offset those with something else where the money's coming in. So this whole, you know, now is the time to prioritize things and drop some stuff, but have a framework to be able to do it.
Make a couple of good points, Nick. I think the difference between gross and net has always been a mystery to museum folks. You know, all of us skipped, we didn't take the economics course in college. We took another, you know, literature course instead, and then never bothered to go back around and actually learn how a profit and loss sheet works and how accounting functions. And it's very difficult when everyone in the organization is talking about gross all the time, but never really calculating that, and that these, you know, incredibly fancy, wonderful, well-attended events actually end up costing more than they bring in. It's sometimes stultifying to people. I want to pivot just a little bit here, because Linda Collett's posting something in the chat that has been a buzz around this topic a little bit. In fact, our friend Heidi Quicksilver had put in the Basecamp, the sticking point I'm seeing in art museums is that they see the collection, images and data, as the only thing they can monetize, but at the same time they have to make it available for free open access. And Linda's referencing this, talking about the Smithsonian and the Met, you know, is there revenue somewhere in there? And then she's suggesting opening things up and maybe finding other ways to drive revenue. Now that reminds me a lot of the incredible success the Rijksmuseum has had in terms of releasing their digital assets and allowing entrepreneurs to play with them, create actual products, which they can then pitch back to the retail operation at the Rijksmuseum. And if they like it, they'll buy a gross of them and then they'll sell them at a profit. That's an amazing model. Maybe it's a specifically Dutch model of doing things, but have either of you given any thought to this? Sort of, is it a diametrically opposed problem that we want free and open access, but now we're being asked to monetize? That's question one. Question two is, what besides the collection should we be thinking about monetizing?
I'll take a stab first, just quickly. It's funny, the one question I actually do get regularly from our trustees, actually through my boss, and then I'll attend a trustee meeting, and then they'll ask, how could we, how can we monetize digital? I've been getting, we've been getting that forever. I get that about twice a year from some trustees. And then it's, they always go to the collection. They always think, why do we give that away for free? And so part of that is, I think, navigating that conversation of what we're supposed to be as a mission-based organization. Full disclosure, our collections database at the Field Museum is actually run out of a different group, but I know that there's pretty widespread belief among like our scientists and like our curators and collection managers that at least to a certain degree, a lot of that data should be made freely available for research. It goes hand in hand with the collection and what it's there for. And then the sort of more business-minded folk think that maybe that should be monetized. And I actually, personal opinion, I think what the Rijksmuseum is doing sounds brilliant. That like through that sort of partnership, that seems like the way to maybe tap in and make use of that. But that the use of our collections otherwise is through researchers, through people that are studying those areas. That doesn't feel to me like something we should be monetizing. And it feels like it's such a reduction of the how to monetize conversation to something that's really black and white. And I think we're much better off thinking about these other things we've been talking about, such as how can digital support these existing retail outlets and existing areas of monetization that frankly, I think museums are hesitant to want to monetize. They're hesitant to make that ask. And I actually think that that's probably more where the opportunity lies, not necessarily in putting a paywall up for that content. But that is the thing that actually comes up all the time. And I actually sort of think that that's a bit of a miss, to be honest, or a simplification perhaps.
This opening statement might annoy some people, but images, certainly digital surrogates, in and of themselves have no real value anymore. So the whole notion of can open access live with monetization, I think absolutely. If I want an image of something, if I can always find something that's very similar to an image that you have that maybe I got to pay a license for. So the value of those things is diminishing, increasingly a lot. But it's kind of what you do with those images that is important around here. So I have two examples from where we are in San Diego. So one approach is a kind of a scale approach to generate traffic. And so the Air and Space Museum have a phenomenal, which they've been doing for years, a digitization program of space, of unique space footage and imagery that they have. And they put it up to Flickr, they put it up to Wikimedia, and it generates a huge amount of traffic back to their website. And they channel that traffic to events and membership and some other things. And then we have another approach, which is the History Center, who don't license images, but they create product out of them. So they'll create a set of framed 19th century photographs of San Diego, or it'll be they're creating product around it, which gives those images that have no value some kind of value. And I think, I don't know how Air and Space figure out how, what the monetary impact of that huge traffic is. But the Air and Space Museum, I think, are generating, a couple of $100,000 a year from their collection images, but packaging them up into something that creates, something more out of that image. So, I agree with you. We all hold these collections in the public trust. We don't really own them. We're temporary custodians of these things, and they should be available for people to use. But I think public-private partnerships are the way to go. The one, my kind of poster child example of this is this is probably in the mid-90s. There was a group that sampled a bunch of Blue Note records, and kind of on the club scene, they created a couple of really popular tracks. And rather, Blue Note, hugely protective of their catalog, but some enterprising person, tracked them down in the club and said, "We'll give you access to the entire vault of our recordings, and have at it. Create an album that we can, actually make money on. And so the group was us three. This may not mean anything to you, but it was the first, their album was the first multi-platinum selling album that Blue Note ever produced. And it was purely out of this recognizing that if somebody else can make money out of your stuff that you haven't been able to do, hire those people or partner with those people and bring them in, because they clearly have the skill and expertise to figure that out.
So it's the lesson that hip hop learned years ago. So the museums just need to adopt the model of hip hop music.
Right. And there is a hip hop museum opened up in New York, I think.
Not open yet, but they're working.
Oh, that's right. Not open yet. They're working on it.
It's going to be in the Bronx. It's going to be one of the first big museums in the Bronx. It's pretty cool. I've talked to the folks who are doing that.
But I do think, the larger point around this is, I think convincing leadership, because it's always been a bit of a delicate conversation about thinking about money. I mean, it's always, because institutions are mission driven, it's always, well, it's our mission to do this, it's our mission to do that. We're having some success helping institutions think less about their mission and more about obligation, and that actually they have the obligation comes in two sides. So one is they have a social obligation, and that is kind of the traditional mission of we serve our communities, we serve the population, we hold the public, a collection in the public trust. So there's a social obligation that they have to commit to, and tax exemption, all these responsibilities that come with it, that's what that is. But they also have a financial obligation, and they have a financial obligation to generate revenue to support the social obligation. But they also have a financial, and this is what is killing me right now, they have a financial obligation to run an organization and pay people and support people. And it's been horrendous what has happened with this immediate dropping of and furloughing and laying off of staff, because that kind of financial business operation, people who work in museums are just, it should be just as valued as the audiences and the visitors. And in fact, you could argue that they are more important, because they're the ones who are more likely to go and visit, museums and support them. So that it's been valuable in helping particularly CEOs think of that differentiation, and that those two things can live together. And because the challenge is, you can deliver on your mission and be financially in the red to a great extent, and you can be, financially in the black and not be delivering on your mission. So those two things, that whole thing needs to work in a much more elegant way.
I wanted to just go back to one thing you said, Nik, which was, repurposing this content with partnerships, the public-private partnership. I have actually also gotten the question quite a bit over years. Would people pay for the brain scoop? Would people pay for the content we put on our blog? How can we more or less paywall this stuff? And I've actually always said and believed with no data to back me up. So it's a hypothesis to be tested at some point, but that I do think that actually the mountains of content that we all sit on at our organizations, whether it's research or whether it's more sort of a narrative storytelling based, whatever it is, that the opportunity is actually through partnerships. So several times people have wanted us to start a podcast, and I've always resisted it, because I thought, or what I've said is, we can work from scratch to try to build an audience for a podcast, or we can go into conversations with WBEZ, which is the local NPR affiliate. We can talk to the Panoply network of podcasts, or Gimlet Media, which is now Spotify. We could talk to them about working with them to, they're looking for content producers. We're content producers. We're going to be limited in our ability to create distribution channels. I think we're smarter to tap into and work with entrepreneurs and organizations for whom that is their expertise. But it's probably, but that's a long-term thing that we would have to test out. I mean, I'll be honest that I don't have the answer for it. That's just my hunch.
I mean, the reality of the first question you asked is, would people pay for it? Is it valuable? Is it valuable? Can I get it from somewhere else? And if I can get it from somewhere else and it's free somewhere else, why would I do that? And so I think this notion of, and that was my point when, all these museums in Balboa Park just started throwing content out there. It's like, you're diminishing your brand. You know, you're just putting this stuff out there that really wasn't designed to be out there. It's old, it lacks relevance, it has no contemporary feel to it. It just looks like it's a knee-jerk reaction because you think you have to get something out there because, I don't know, you think that people are going to forget about you. I mean, I couldn't understand the mentality of that. But, you know, we have one example in the park where, and it's actually performing arts. And so they were very thoughtful about, this is not a knee-jerk reaction. We're going to actually create some quality programming using, so they had a schedule of performances. So they just did these unbelievably engaging kind of short 5-minute videos, employing the actors who they'd already paid to create these just moments of, you know, like Broadway hits that are, you know, talking about the virus and health and hygiene and all this kind of stuff. They had a massive response from their audiences and have significantly grown their not their membership, but certainly followers, you know, on social media, because they've been doing this thoughtful, not just kind of tsunami of stuff, but these thoughtful moments that are clearly they've made an investment, high production quality, and are of value. And either the value is that you sell it in and of itself, or it contributes to, you know, a larger, you know, again, this notion of how do we build scale in this time so that when when things do come back, we're talking to a larger audience.
It brings up a couple of thoughts for me too, guys. One, museum decision making is all too often driven by envy, right? So if one museum does something, then suddenly everyone selects a certain kind of software or works with a certain vendor, then everyone goes running in that direction out of a kind of weird envy-driven problem. And I think that's when people lose sight of mission. And of course, I agree with you, Nik, no money, no mission, right? It's right. A business in its core. And I'm always surprised when I'm talking with executive directors and I say that sentence, you know, a museum is a business, and they immediately say, no, we're not, we're a nonprofit. I think, yeah, nonprofit is a tax position. You still have
not
to have
a mindset, right?
You have to pay payroll, like all those things still have to happen. The other thing that I'm often struck by is and I can't believe it becomes a debate, but it does. I have often argued that what museums sell, what our sector sells, is experience. We don't sell our objects, we don't sell our data. We sell coffee and products, and maybe a few big brand museums make some money off of that. But generally what we're selling are experiences. And when we go to digital, somehow we lose that thread in a way. So what you were just describing, Nik, sounds like a really interesting experience. And of course that's going to bring attention and those kinds of things. So I don't know, do either of those thoughts resonate with either of you?
Yeah, well, I think that the challenge is, how do we create online experiences? You know, how do we pivot to a more of a digital first mentality? You know, and so we're having a number of conversations right now with institutions about what does digital first mean for an organization? And so, you know, certainly what museums are most focused on are kind of exhibitions. So let's think about a digital first exhibition. So what happens right now is the exhibition, there's a exhibition production process, and ephemera from that, either their installation shots or they're the object list or there's something else, is a kind of second thought about, oh, you know, we should put that on the website and we'll have, you know, a couple of paragraphs of marketing ephemera to say, come and see this thing. But that thing on the website, you know, the exhibition is going to last for 3 to 6 months. The stuff on the website, you know, it's there for 20 years probably. So why not think about what is our online experience? What are the education goals? What are the experiential goals online? And how might that morph over time? You know, over the next 5 or 10 years, maybe it's some kind of contributory experience where people are submitting stuff, so this thing grows online. But then how does that inform what you need to do on in the institution? And I give you one example of a museum we're talking to. And so the notion is, so right now with what's going on, you know, tourism's gone for the next couple of years. So any institutions that heavily rely on tourism, they're tough, particularly if it's flight tourism. So drive markets, you know, really important right now, and communities really important right now. And what needs to happen is you've got to increase the repeat visitation from your drive markets and your local community. So how do you do that? So we've been talking to it's actually a natural history museum around. Let's think of a year in terms of geological time. And so, in week 2, amoeba, appear, and, February 15th, dinosaurs appear, and on, September the 1st, the dinosaurs disappear, all those kinds of things, and then think, okay, so how does that translate to a physical experience? So you've got this kind of this digital experience going on online that is engaging and giving people something to connect to. It allows you to kind of replay it over time. So it's like so if we're watching a Netflix series, it's like, so I'm on episode 6 of this fabulous Netflix series. You can, tonight you can go and catch up on the first 6 episodes, and then together we can experience, the season finale. So having that concept play out on a website, but then on week 2, in the museum is a display of amoeba, and in February 15th it's the first dinosaurs, and so you're having this thing play out, which is always there now, and people can always replay online, but you're giving people a reason to come back to the institution on a more frequent basis and see something different.
Thanks, Nik. That's cool. Vicky, you posted a really interesting and somewhat complex question in the chat. Vicky, why don't you unmute yourself and jump in and ask the question directly to us, because I think it'd be easier than me trying to read it from this very tiny print on my screen. Can you do that?
Sure, sorry. I'm known for complex questions. Agree with what you're saying about the potential revenue from partnerships as well as experience-based asks for support from users. I think one of the big things we run into is the need to prove the case and show data that demonstrates those models work versus the models that museum leaders tend to be familiar with, like products or other modes of revenue generation that they've seen work in the past. So I just asked the question whether we know of or are building that case with data in the cultural sector, and how might we do that?
No idea. No, I mean, I think there are, the challenge here is, when you see something successful in the museum community, you're only really going to hear about it if it is successful, and really successful. I wish we had a standing, those of you may remember the epic fail session, which was down in San Diego, I think. I wish we had an epic fail SIG, maybe. It's like we never talk about these problems. So I think data, the museum community is certainly leadership is just waking up to the fact that data and measurement and data-driven decision making is valid. I think we've got to highlight some of the examples that are out there that are definitely appear to be successful, or certainly I think the challenge is, and you said this earlier, Douglas, the museum world is a world of emulation, and a museum sees somebody doing something and they want to copy it. I think when you see some of the examples that are happening, so Corning example is a great one. Carnegie Natural History Museum of the guy who tells, I forget his name, tells the snail jokes on Instagram. It's like there's 150,000 people following them. Well, that's great. That's how you get the scale, and then think about, okay, so then how do we take this to the next step, and maybe think about monetizing it. And there's examples of museums doing kind of virtual field trips but putting them together as a series. And so charging $10 a pop for a virtual kind of lecture interaction, but then if you buy the whole series, you get free membership. But it's a way of generating and increasing membership, while the institution isn't open. But when you open, you have this bigger membership base to look at. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question explicitly, but I think we got to focus on scale right now and building scale, because then we can do stuff to it.
I saw your question as well, Vicky, and what's been interesting is during this closure time, we have had time to clean house a little bit. Plus I had a couple of new employees that were just starting to hit the ground, just starting to get really up to speed before this all happened. So we've taken this moment to, I have a couple of people running 100 miles an hour to build out a reporting infrastructure that we've always wanted to have, where we're reporting out how our efforts are doing in digital to membership, to the Learning Center, to other areas of fundraising. And now we're also taking data from their efforts, whether it's email and newsletter campaigns, and we're actually bringing all that together into dashboards. And so we literally just in the past month have hit a point where there's a monthly meeting that actually came out of something we got from Douglas's team, this brand content plan. We now have this thing called the field content plan that's been overseen by Caitlin Carney on my team, who I know many of you know. She's running this weekly group that has stakeholders from around the museum. They're bringing in their programming initiatives and content needs. And then she's actually running a content plan that spans the whole museum, her and a colleague in marketing. And we've now we've just begun bringing in the last couple of weeks, reporting back out. So for a long time, it was coordinating the content, coordinating the structure of how we're going to support different things. And now we're actually doing that and then layering in, well, here's the things we did to support the things previously and how did that go, including when things didn't go very well, which we don't know yet because we don't have baselines for that. I think that on the digital team, we sort of have some baselines, but others are getting used to this idea. And you have to be brave because it's actually showing how some things we've done have not been amazing. Some things have been amazing. Some things some of our colleagues wanted to do in other departments didn't necessarily work so well. There's no judgment on that. But these things are small at this point. So I think it'll take some time to evolve, but it's getting that in place. And then this is real tactical, but we've literally just started running Google Optimize on a bunch. Just the week before last, we launched a whole series of tests. So we're testing everything from headlines to images to copy to different things. And so we're actually using this moment to bring the idea of reporting and data to the rest of the museum, very aggressively trying to imbue the rest of the culture with that's okay to look at things that we do, because the marketing, PR, and digital groups where we sit, they're doing that already, but now we're trying to get the rest of the museum on board with that. So I'm hopeful that will help us in this effort now to figure out really what helps monetization.
Brad, I'm going to piggyback on that just a little bit with a point that I think is really vital in our sector right now. Is agree with you, Nik, that museums are still in the early stages of sort of leaning into data and understanding data and thinking about reporting and analytics. The problem that I have seen repeatedly is that because most museum leaders are untrained when it comes to analyzing data, the people they hire are often not the best data analysts. And in that regard, this may sound nuanced, but when they come to leadership, they've got a conclusion. They've looked at the data, they found a conclusion, but instead of starting with the conclusion, they sort of feel like they have to prove themselves. So they show leaders all of the data, which of course, leaders then immediately just grab their confirmation bias goggles and scan the data for anything that confirms their bias and say, see, it's there in the data. So this is a sort of plea to all of you who are on this call who are involved in any kind of data analytics or reporting. What you take to your leaders need to be your conclusions. Don't show them data. They can't analyze data. They have to trust you to analyze data. You bring them those visualizations, those graphics, those reports, those to-dos that have been proven by the data. When they question whether or not you analyze the data properly, the answer is yes.
Right. Insight, not data. I think, and actually going back to, again, Vicky, your original question, I think, there isn't an opportunity where we can look to and say, okay, we can generate substantial money from this. I think it's looking across everything that's going on, and if you do create efficiencies, it's like building any kind of budget. It's, well, we can make some revenue here, we can make some revenue there, we can cut expenses here, we can be more efficient over here, and recognize. My biggest point I'm trying to make to certainly the institutions that I'm talking to is this is a time for investment. you know, the museum community has been through successive rounds, and the knee-jerk reaction that most leadership make is to cut. You know, when they see a problem, the reaction is, okay, cut, we got to reduce expenses to match revenue, as opposed to, well, if we invest something here, we'll actually generate more revenue, so we'll offset it. My problem that I see right now is all these people who are being letting go in institutions are just tying the institution's hands behind its back to be able to do anything anymore. And so, you know, when I think when Laura Lott talks about, you know, a third of the museums may not come out of this, I think it's the museums who are not investing right now, who are just trying, and it is difficult, you know, I know that it is difficult to figure out and have the strength to create an investment plan rather than just, you know, X something off the budget. But investment is an absolutely key activity right now.
Hey, Nick, is it so something that came across my desk just this morning was my boss sharing with me a proposal from another group to take some existing programs and bring them online, and what my thoughts were. And my thoughts were high level. If I were over this group, I would green light these as concepts, but I'd want to see it further fleshed out a little with how will we know what success looks like? Because we tried doing these things when we didn't have these very acute revenue problems. So if we, you know, we weren't doing it then, but let's do it now. Like, what are these meant to turn a profit? Because it's going to be a lot of effort for a small amount of profit. We know that from experience. Or is it okay that it's not turning a profit? They're mission-based, or they have some other ancillary benefit tied into attendance, as you guys were sort of riffing on earlier. I mean, is that an approach to take from your point of view as a consultant? Is this a moment where we should be asking those tougher questions of existing things that we're doing? So it's not just about creating new programs, but asking the questions of existing ones, like what's profitable here? What's the metric?
You know, well, it's why did you suddenly think that we could, you know, why didn't we have to generate revenue from this before? You know, that's a question. It's like, you know, because we could have, you know, there could have been an initiative to say, wait, we're doing all this digital stuff, and should we start looking at how to generate revenue from it, or what are our options here? I think my problem is this knee-jerk reaction thing. You know, it really does frustrate me that there's this, okay, we've got to be doing something. Well, do something that's much smarter right now. Work smarter. Figure out where your organization is going to be in a couple of years' time. What are your broader digital engagement goals? You know, what are your audience engagement goals? What are your you know, in broad term, and how does digital support that? And then back that into, you know, kind of create a framework from that to then be able to say when this stuff comes along, well, that doesn't, you know, it doesn't hit these, you know, 5 criteria, so, you know, we're not going to do it. But I think it's got to be part of a longer term strategy, and that's certainly what the institutions we're working with is now. How do you parallel these things? How do you stop doing stuff? How do you create capacity? How do you spend time thinking about what your long-term goals should be? And then, you know, don't just think that you've got to give, you know, you've just got to keep spinning your wheels. It's really frustrating.
It looks like Eli has a question. Eli, you jumped in a couple times.
Yeah, well, I was just wondering, in some ways, is this also, I mean, there's a couple of challenges. One challenge is, I think, that what happens from senior management, as they tend to look at pilots and programs that some kind of thing will never happen, and, you know, it doesn't really sort of fit in what the institution really want to do, even though this is an opportunity, like Nick says, to an extent, to think more strategically than tactically. I think the other thing too, I think it's a really interesting opportunity to test out new models, because, you know, as we all know, that museums and science centers are under tremendous pressure for various reasons to look at new ways of gauging audiences more relevant and inclusive, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we all know that in a lot of ways that digital has always been seen from the curators and whatever as some kind of bastard child. And now all of a sudden it's now has another level of importance.
Prodigal son, right.
Yeah. The other thing else I want to say is that I think there's really a compelling need to not have to do this all by ourselves. That, you know, one of the things that's been banding about is this idea about how do you create shared assets and resources? How do you make the museum field operate more like a network? You know, because you think about it, it may be like the Brooklyn Museum, AM&H or whatever. They might have the capability for testing out some things and for doing mobile apps or whatever it is, because they have large endowments and the resources. But for most of the museums, medium and small, they don't. So then the other question is, how do we set up a, whatever it is, the structures for it and protocols or whatever it is. So instead of one museum trying to spend 50,000, 30,000 to do what we're trying to do, maybe it's 20 museums trying, you know, spend a significant amount of money to really move the needle.
Those are all interesting and pertinent questions, Eli, and points. Thank you for bringing those in. I want to be acutely aware of everyone's time. I know that we usually these days are all back to back with our online meetings, and we're just a minute off the hour. There will be another session on this topic, May 14th. I think it's 1 p.m. Eastern time. I hope we'll see a lot of you there. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for participating in the chat. There's more in there than we could get to, so I hope everyone had a chance to take a look at it. Please thank Brad and Nik with some virtual claps with me, because I can't hear the applause, but I appreciate both of you very much. This topic we could never cover in 1 hour, but we certainly slayed a few dragons along the way. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Douglas.
Very well done, Douglas. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Brad, great talking to you. Take care, everyone.
Cheers.
Okay, finally made it. Unbelievable.